Light Pollution News, August 2025. Keep knocking. You don't want to miss this one. We dive deep into ecology, all things ecology, with Bug Life's own David Smith. Also, where do we balance nighttime conservation with societal progress? I welcome back Kelly Beatty of Sky and Telescope, lighting designer Kerem Asfaroglu of Dark Source, and Bug Life's own David Smith. Find a bug or moth and listen in for an invertebrate-driven show this month. And be sure to check out Bug Life's new Don't Neglect the Night campaign. Let's get started. Welcome to Light Pollution News, the show where we look at the stories affecting our nighttime conservation. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, and we do this every other week. Welcome to first-time listeners. If you are curious about anything on today's show, head on over to our website for links. Also in the show notes, via whatever application you tend to use to listen to the show, you can find all of the ways to connect with us, all our social media, links to email lists. You can even text us any questions or thoughts you have. There's a text link in your show notes. You can also reach me directly, bill@lightpollutionnews.com. Finally, this is a listener-supported show. So if you like what you do, why not consider becoming a supporter? Supporter memberships start at a low rate of $3 a month. Supporters are literally keeping us going each month. Thanks to your help, we're able to cover much of our costs. However, the one cost we still have yet to cover is personnel, which includes a social media manager. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, I guess. We are looking for a new person to take over social media. My wife, Caitlin's done an outstanding job, and I want to thank her from the bottom of my heart for putting us on the map and doing such a great job with their social media. However, she is electing to move on and do other things with her time. If you find yourself interested, or you know someone who might be interested in this, this is an excellent opportunity for anyone looking to build a good, solid portfolio before they try and find a big-time job. Check out the opportunity listing on our website. Unfortunately, like I said, it's an unpaid position. Until we can close that gap, it's just going to remain that way. If you're interested in the role, again, that's under the Opportunities tab on our website. If you like the show, but you don't want to become a supporter, don't worry. Why not take some time to listen to the show, make a note, find something interesting, and share it with someone you know. We thrive on word-of-mouth marketing from folks like yourself. So you guys are a marketing department, and we really appreciate it. So kicking things off today, I'm very excited about this show. We're going to cover a lot of ecology ground today. Normally, environmental news, it's the biggest piece of the whole bin that I get each month. Environmental news is by far and away the largest piece. And especially the past few months have been insane with the amount of news and studies that have been coming out. But have no fear. I have three great guests here to really help me walk through some of these stories. First up, listeners of the Sky and Telescope Star Tour Astronomy podcast will recognize his voice, and will definitely recognize the name because I know you've been reading for years. And that is Mr. Kelly Beatty. Kelly, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
I think you mentioned last episode about in Dark Sky, Massachusetts, you guys put forth a bill and, just try to keep resubmitting and putting that back in a docket. But I was thinking when you said that, there's a lot of people out there who get frustrated and, it's almost an exercise in futility. Maybe it's an exercise in some twisted Zen. It's definitely discipline to be able to constantly do something and really get no results on that. What would you say to someone who is feeling like they're getting no headway?
I could give you anecdotes. One person can make a difference, and often a major difference. And the advice I would give is just don't be afraid to knock on every door, because once in a while, one of those doors is going to open, and then you've made progress.
There you go. That's a good one. I like that. That's a lot of door knocking probably, but hey, Okay, well, moving on to Kerem. Kerem, how you doing, man? Kerem Asfaroglu. Said that right again, I hope. Dark Source's own, Kerem, you are a lighting designer. You do all things to make buildings look amazing. And I've seen what you've done over there in Ireland. The lighting not just enhances, but tells a story.
Thanks. Keep talking. I really like how you... Thanks, Bill. Lovely to be here again. And yeah, I think that the hardest sell of the type of lighting design I do is try to show that there's an architectural finesse to less illumination or judicious lighting, unlike the belief of you have to, go above and beyond to celebrate a building or a given space. But light, absence of light can actually create a very stark and strong character and confidence. And delighted to hear that, you could actually see it through the project.
Yeah. Do you work with any students or do you mentor any folks on this kind of the framing of your use of light?
I do a lot of presentations. So I try to, play game with cards open as much as possible. And I think, this is how we're going to initiate change. So I'll be going to my university where I studied the architectural lighting design, Masters of Architectural Lighting Design in Wismar, Germany. So I'll be speaking there as the keynote opening the Responsible Lighting Conference, which is a big deal for me because originally from south of Turkey. So, very relevant to the theme of ecology and pollination, us being here, we're cross-pollinating right now. We're sharing ideas and thoughts, and we don't know where it's going to take us or who we're going to inspire. And I clearly remember, studying masters in Germany in a very well-known establishment. There was no talk of light pollution. And I graduated in 2010. Life brought me to London 2011. It was not until I've seen the documentary Sky Dark or City Dark, 2014 or 13 or 14, which blew my mind. And by that point, I was already experienced lighting design, and I never knew the theme of light pollution. And I never understood the consequences of what my job does, because our judging criteria was purely visual, and we had an environmental responsibility.
That's great to hear about the influence of just a little piece of media, right? So to Kelly's point, getting that media in front of someone, it changed you, converted you.
Definitely. It alters you. What was that? Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stranger. I'm a terrible astronomer, but I grew up with, Carl Sagan's Cosmos series. So I love communication of science, and I like to be able to communicate science. As a matter of fact, whenever I see actually, David speaking in a room, he really is a great communicator. He really breaks it down. So the most important impact on pollinators and invertebrates, I always got that from David. So and I think it's really helps your own vocabulary when you're actually seeing and hearing from other people as well.
Well, that David is Mr. David Smith from Bug Life, and he's with us again. David, welcome back. I think last time you were on, we just installed a pollinator garden. You know what? This year, it's looking pretty good. We've got a lot of pollinators out there. It's a party out there. It's actually pretty fun. I like doing photography. And I used to have to drive 25 minutes away to find a good meadow to catch some of these bugs and everything like that. Now it's right out back. And I can just sit there, just open the door, sit there with the camera, and I'm like, this is great.
Yes, well, thanks for having me back, first of all, and thanks to our fellow guests for kind words straight away. It's a bit of a thing to have to live up to now, but it's great to hear. This is why I absolutely love working with invertebrates and insects. Small changes can lead to big outcomes, right? So, you can install a garden and all of a sudden you start to see the bees and the butterflies and things coming back in. It's great, particularly in this world of eco-anxiety where, we put in a lot of effort yielding what seems to be quite, limited results or results that take a really long time. But with invertebrates, you can get in there and you can get some outcomes really quickly. You can make you feel brilliant about these things. Conversely to that, we can't just rely on individuals making small changes. We need to see this backed up, supported by governments and nations, creating these whole-scale changes that we can get the smallest and I think probably the most important set of creatures on the planet, a really good sustainable levels that can help support everything else. But invertebrates are great. They're the first wild animals really we engage with. If you truly think about it, you may have house pets and things like that, but actually invertebrates, you have snails and worms and things. When you're a kid, you play with these things, you're actually engaging with the real wild, and it's invertebrates. And then kind of drift away a little bit as you sort of grow up, but it seems to be coming back around more and more.
Yeah, David, you mentioned that when you're a kid. So we went on vacation with my wife's whole family, and our 1-year-old niece, she was just blown away by bugs. Like she would find them and she would go right over to them and follow them and play with them. And that was like her TV for every day. You know, she'd go over, find an ant doing something, or, you know, give her a cicada shell and she was fascinated by that. And
yeah, definitely. You know, it's such a great way to get involved and engaged in nature. You know, there's always the quest for the big charismatic megafauna, but actually, like, very rare that you can't find a bug to look at wherever you are. You know, you can find something and study that, and it's always a great joy to be able to do that, break it down right to that smallest level, because we get things right for the smallest creatures, you know, we're going to get things right for everything else.
There we go. That's a quote to live by. I like that. Well, you're here with us today not to talk about invertebrates specifically, but to also tell me about this Don't Neglect the Night campaign that I signed up for. And I don't know if I'm the only American signed up for it. Maybe, Kelly, you need to sign up for this too. Get 2 Americans every year sign up. Tell us about this. What is this Don't Neglect the Night campaign by Bug Life?
So the idea behind this campaign, you know, it largely stemmed from my work addressing light pollution. But looking into it, the nocturnal environment is basically forgotten when it comes to conservation plans, environmental plans for virtually everyone. You know, you start looking UN conventions, no mention of the night. You start looking at nations' conservation plans, environmental plans, nature plans, restoration plans, no mention of the night. Yet this is a huge problem because at least 2/3 of all living species are active at night. And it's 50% of the world's time, right, is at night. So if we ignore the night, we are completely forgetting about a huge, huge chunk of nature, a huge, huge portion of time. So the idea behind this really is to create a moment, a campaign that we can continue to work on where we can challenge policymakers to ensure that policies actually start to consider the nocturnal environment and the impacts and the threats that the nocturnal environment faces. A huge part of that obviously being light pollution. You know, we are eroding this environment quicker than any other environment, yet we're doing virtually nothing to stop that. So we're trying to build up this campaign. We're trying to gather public signatures that we can take to policymakers everywhere. You know, it's not just limited to the UK. We predominantly our work is in the UK, but we're looking to, you know, continue that, and we're doing some great work in Europe and also on an international scale. And we really want to have a mass movement of people supporting the need to actually address the threats that the nighttime are facing.
Well, speaking of that, we'll jump right into it because I want to start this article. I saw this, and it's an interesting one. Here in America, we have something called Buc-ee's. It's a cultural phenomenon for a gas station, if a gas station can be a cultural phenomenon. Radiates out of Texas, and they're starting to spread out all throughout the U.S. In Georgia, a new Buc-ee's came in. Georgia Department of Transportation had to install new traffic controls because this is, for you who are not familiar with a Buc-ee's, it is a gas station meets a Walmart supercenter. So you have a trucker. It's not a trucker stop, but it's kind of like a trucker stop. It has a bazillion gas pumps, and it has a mega box store in the center. It's from Texas. You know, hey, what would you expect? So Georgia Department of Transportation had to install new lighting, and what they opted for was towering high interchange light masts. And those light masts are actually seen for miles now, and they are impacting, or the fear is that they're impacting sea turtle hatchlings on the Georgia coast. So Georgia Department of Transit actually claims that these light masts are going to be temporary to a point until new streetlights can be installed. They had to come up with a solution to handle increased traffic flow and increased activity around this new built-up area. So a case of, you know, forgotten night, right?
Exactly. And this is something, you know, we see it all the time. It's nighttime. What's going on? There's nothing going on. So it doesn't matter. We won't start to consider the impact that these things will have on, you know, even turtles, however far away from these lights. It's just completely forgotten about. And this is that whole idea that we're trying to bring people around to think about these things. So actually go, hey, we need to give this some consideration. So yeah, we're gonna do something that we need to do, but we're going to do it with consideration for the rest of the creatures that we share the night with, and, you know, the night sky, of course.
Yeah, and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Resources Division saw that there were higher numbers of hatchling misorientations in 2023 and 2024 and they're attributing that to the new facility. Now, time will tell on that one, but hopefully to get better lighting. And really, it comes down to simple fixes. It's simple. Reduce the lighting, shield it up, make it a nice power. You're good to go. There's also another policy one, and this one, I'm not going to wade too deep into our U.S. political stuff here, but there's a place that's been called Alligator Alcatraz. And I didn't really know about that. I don't follow our political news that much. I didn't know about this really until this month when I was looking around. Alligator Alcatraz is a new, I guess, a facility set up by Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. on an old airport. The airport sits in the Everglades. Now, why it matters is because in 2016, Dark Sky designated this area as part of a dark sky preserve. And Kelly, I think that was the first dark sky preserve. So the concern is that with the new facility that they built, which is to extricate illegal immigrants, there's been framing around it, the LED lighting that they haphazardly put up leads to a glow like Yankee Stadium. Now, I'm not sure what that means, but it doesn't sound good. So I guess on this policy one, like where would you go? Like there's no case in point for good lighting in the criminal world, is there? Like, I've never heard of a place that, when you drive by a prison, it's got good lights.
Actually, that's not true. I don't want to distract from Alligator Alley and how messy that is. In Southern Vermont, there's an annual star party going on right now called Stellafane. It's the oldest organized star party in the country anywhere. And it's in Springfield, Vermont. And there happens to be a giant penitentiary in Springfield, Vermont. And some 15 years ago, they decided that they were going to redo the lighting there. And they did something really smart. They engaged one of the leading dark sky friendly lighting designers, Nancy Clanton, probably a name that all of you have heard. And she designed the lights for this prison to make it good security for the inmates and the people watching them. And at the same time, very little off light into the surrounding community. So it can be done.
I wasn't aware of that. Nancy has been on the show, and that's great to hear. And in this case, what would happen if they set this up, the lighting persists, and it degrades the quality of the dark sky preserve?
Well, this is Florida, and I don't mean to steal David's thunder on the sort of environmental aspect of this, but just from a political note, the governor's Ron DeSantis. He's an acolyte for President Trump, and that mindset, and we're seeing more and more situations where the government runs roughshod over whatever environmental concerns or laws might exist, and we're seeing that in specifically in the Environmental Protection Agency nationally in the U.S., that a lot of the regulations are being relaxed or eliminated because they're an impediment to growth, to industrial expansion. And so that mindset is starting to trump some of the environmental concerns. And so I think in this case, it remains to be seen whether anything is done because there's a lot of steam that this has generated, a lot of pushback because it is so egregious. And,
and it has a catchy name. Come on, Alligator Alcatraz.
Alligator Alcatraz, for sure. So I think this is a story that will unfold in the weeks ahead. Obviously, it's part of for those who've not heard about this, part of what makes Alligator Alcatraz such a nasty place is that they leave the lights on in these tents all the time as a sort of an intimidation tactic for the detainees there. It's really bad on all kinds of levels, not just the broader environmental ones. But the fact that the government felt that they could just go in there and do whatever they wanted, I think this is one of those situations that's going to end up in the courts, actually.
Kelly, we see this idea. So real quick, and I'm not going to drive too far off this, but you mentioned about the environmental regulation being set aside. I've noticed in states, and it's both in blue and red, both in Democrat and Republican states, that the states are starting to take away power from the local government and allowing unilaterally to control local policies. And case in point, we were just up through the beautiful state of West Virginia, and one of the the most scenic spots on the East Coast of the U.S. is the Kanawha Valley and Spruce Knob and that area in there. And Blackwater Falls State Park, which is a beautiful area, is about to be slated to have a massive data center that's going to operate with diesel power, maybe a mile down the street. And that was state driven. That wasn't local driven. So the policies in this country, we're at an inflection point where we need to figure out how to use what we're doing with our local governance here. Which brings me to the topic of NIMBYism, because I think that is what's driving a lot of what we're seeing between the state and local and even the federal level pushback. So if dark skies are going to truly take hold, how do we get over things like Senator Ed McBroom up in the Upper Peninsula of the Michigan fighting against having dark sky designations because he thinks that they're going to impact mining? Can dark skies and mining coexist?
Not in the Dakotas or in West Texas. I mean, so that you picked, the mining issue is a very specific situation. Listeners who've not heard, in the very westernmost corner of Texas is Big Bend National Park, and also one of the premier astronomical observatories, McDonald Observatory in Fort Davis, really pristinely dark areas. Not that far away is a huge oil field. I guess my point here is that you don't know where you're going to discover the oil, right? And it could be under a place that's pristine, or it could be under downtown Manhattan. It could be anywhere, right? And so these are 24/7 operations involving a lot of light and a lot of very poor quality light, intense light for the operations, which are dangerous often going on. And so in this particular case, in the Michigan case, you're right in that, and that it was a news clip, and the state rep who wanted to prohibit all of these dark sky designations, he glibly said, we see the same people, the same environmentalist people, those Karams and those David Smiths, and they're against all emissions and dark light, and they're all doing the same thing all the time. He was painting with a very broad brush. But to your broader point, Bill, a lot of the places that are receiving dark sky designations and are being protected are never going to be eyed as industrial development sites. This one that you mentioned, in West Virginia with the data center a mile away from this beautiful spot, that I think it is an outlier. If you think about all of the places in all countries, in Wales and Ireland and in the U.S., where a lot of these dark sky sanctuaries are and places are being approved, they are places that industry has had the opportunity to build there for a long time, and they've chosen not to. There's just not the infrastructure. There's not, the population to supply workers. And so to first approximation, I think that there will still be plenty of places that can become dark sky refuges, for lack of a better word, state parks and and a lot of that property is under government control. That's an important consideration, because there would be prohibitions against building a data center in a national park, for example. And so I one would hope, right? And so I don't want to dominate. Maybe the other two guys have something on this, but I think that one particular case that you mentioned, and the case in northern Michigan, I just don't see that as the start of a larger trend.
And Kelly, the case in northern Michigan is that they have a prohibition in effect, and they're trying to get that rolled back. Prohibition on dark sky designations. And real quick, because David, we're going to get to the ecology stuff. This just kind of fetters into this. South Tyneside Council, where's this at? South Shields, England. Yeah. I spoke about them a while back, where you had individuals who are trying to prevent the installation of streetlights because it's a big cycling area. And now the council looks like they're going to put in streetlights. They're going to be installing them in a way that is supposedly using shielding. The poles actually used in a manner to help cut down on light trespass to, I presume, residents. Lighting is supposed to be cut by 50% in hours after 10 p.m. But I guess the community is still kind of fighting these lights. They're still not happy. They don't want the lights. If you rep up progress or something perceived as progress with Dark Skies. Dark Skies is going to be on the losing end. Is that what's going on here?
I'm not sure. I think, this it's always hard, right? Because they're looking to increase cycling, which, is great. But also we've got lights on bikes, which some of them are brighter than, I'm fairly certain they're brighter than my car lights.
Yeah, there are car headlights. I mean, when I bike, because I commute all around Philadelphia on a bike, and they're blinding. You can't see around these lights.
This has to be balanced with the lighting that they're putting in. And actually, is that lighting going to be coherent across the entire stretch? Is it actually going to be doing what they're looking out to do? It's great that the council are considering how to mitigate these lights. There's an ecological aspect to this. That part of the coastline in the UK, it's a lot of migratory seabirds move up along there. If you start putting more lighting in on along cliff tops or coastal paths, there's a chance of more grounding of those birds and things like that. So there's a lot of things going on. It's not just about the trespass to members of the public. It's really hard, right? We've got a balance. We're not all about just not having any lights, but it's making sure that those lights are fit for purpose. I don't know enough about this to be able to say whether it's, it's going to hinder progress and whether it's going to stop people riding their bikes there. I ride my bike at night. I've got lights. I feel pretty safe and lit up in very unlit areas. So yeah, it's really tricky to say. But I would say the good thing here is it sounds like the council are taking note, which doesn't always happen. So, maybe there's some progress there that the community are achieving in trying to lower the light pollution.
That was my thought too. It sounded like a pretty good deal from the council.
It's a recurring theme is that, as much as we're advocating importance of darkness, the challenge is always how do you balance it so you don't come across anti-development. That's always going to be one of the key challenges of the Dark Skies mission, because we are environmentally, we're progressive, but sometimes the idea of what progress means for others is they don't judge it from the same perspective. And the trend that I've been seeing in these news articles is whether big or small new developments being introduced to the areas where probably these locations were not lit before, and I don't know for the UK precedent, but for the power and data center or the mining potential, they will end up being in somewhere probably the biodiversity never had any chance to adapt to, existing sort of lighting. And that will cut through their, dark corridors. It will introduce barriers where we can see, the behaviors of the, biodiversity adapting to, let's say, being in a city or in the greater context of the city, that there could be, a way of figuring out, we know bats are very active, twilight and etc. So the biggest challenge that I see here is that we're introducing lighting where the lighting is never been and just basically becomes a bit of a destructive force. So we have to come from the mindset of, yes, we want the lighting to happen, but how? I think the starting point is always a bit like you're almost starting the game with a bit losing foot, in the sense of this is not about elimination. This is about serious mitigation. How do we mitigate the negative impacts as much as possible? So we allow the development to happen, but it happens in the right way so it doesn't have a huge impact on the biodiversity. Is always going to be the challenging balancing act, I think.
Well, moving into biodiversity, David, this is a really cool article, and I know it got a lot of press, but I want to start off with our ecology news bucket with this guy in Australia, the bogong. I don't know if that's how you say it or not. It's a moth that looks fuzzy and brown, kind of shaped to be what a normal moth would look like, I guess. But these moths are special because they sometimes migrate over 1,000 kilometers away, and they do so by use of starlight and the Earth's magnetic field. These aren't the only ones, right, David?
Yeah, there's, the more and more we are studying nocturnal species, the more we're finding out that this is quite a common thing. One of the things I like to, particularly when I'm talking to astronomers, I'm not an astronomer, I'll look up at the night sky, but I'm not an astronomer, but our paths cross quite a lot, as you can imagine. I like to point out that bugs probably were the first astronomers, right? Because some of them have been here since the dawn of time. They've just been here on this planet, constantly looking up at the night sky. So as humans, we've got nothing on the bugs they've been looking up and using the night sky for their navigation. And that, I think this is amazing. This is such a cool thing that just, we're starting to realize how, not just moths, but things like dung beetles as well, actually are using not just the stars, but like constellations and all sorts is going on up there to find their way around. Like, yeah, it kind of blows my mind that, like, one, these things are happening, and two, there are people out there who have been able to figure this stuff out.
It's wild to think of a little tiny bug. I guess we're so biased as being humans, right? You just always automatically deprecate the intelligence of every creature around you. But it's amazing that a little bug can figure it all out based on the sky. And since we're on the topic of moths and nighttime pollinators, did you know that in North America, we have an impressive moth migration here as well? One that takes place in the Great Plains of the U.S. The Miller moth, a large brown moth, starts out in the flatlands of Colorado. Well, flatlands of Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska, anywhere east of the mountains. And then it makes a 100-mile voyage to the west to seek out nectar in higher elevation. Does so at night. I think most people who don't listen to the show probably have no idea that there's nighttime pollinators. Dave, are you able to speak to nighttime pollinators, who they are, what they are? I guess we don't really have an understanding firmly about what percentages pollinate at night. What plant, do we have an understanding what plants they like? I don't know. Why don't you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, so it's, again, going back to our whole idea of don't neglect the night, and you've mentioned it, like, humans are biased, right? We're a daytime species. Like, we have evolved to be awake during the day and asleep during the night. It's only artificial lighting really that's kept us up after the sun goes down. But everything else has kind of carried on and has evolved with these natural rhythms of day and night. And we focus so much of our efforts on what's going on during the daytime, and people be really familiar with the butterflies and bees with regards to pollination. But we know that a huge variety of animals, and it's not just moths, but bats and other insects, will be pollinating plants during the nighttime really effectively, and sometimes more effectively than some of the daytime species, because they're not just honed in on certain plants. They'll go to different plants, and they'll be really effective at kind of cross-pollination, which is vital for, some fruit species, for example, but also things like wildflowers that, really thrive on some of these nocturnal species pollinating them, which in turn will help benefit the daytime species that are seeking out the nectar that these flowers will produce. So without the nighttime species, the daytime species can suffer as a result. And it's something that, there's a real similarity to what we talked about in the previous episode around that balance between what can benefit the nighttime, can benefit the daytime, and how those things work together. This is definitely the case with regards to with pollination, but we're also starting to have an understanding about how light pollution is impacting pollination, and there's some studies which have shown quite a significant, around 60% reduction in plant pollinator interactions in areas that are suffering from light pollution. And that's huge. We talk about pollination as this free service to pollinate, foods that we eat, and actually, if we're doing something that's eroding it by 2/3, that's massive. And I think there's also, again, we're still understanding this. Okay, so there's still challenges to be made as to just how much of an impact light pollution has with regards to insect pollinator behavior. But we know that there's a pressure, and we should be really taking this as a huge warning about something we can change, we can alter, we can do something about it. And I think this is for me, this is going to be a real key area going forward. Pollination and pollinators are a big topic in the invertebrate world. People seem to grasp and understand it. There's also the financial side with regards to agriculture for it. And I think more and more we look into it, the more and more we're seeing this as a problem, light pollution really hindering pollinators' ability to live their lives and go about doing the things that they do so well.
David, are there certain plants that in my pollinator mix are dedicated for night pollinators, or does it matter, or do we forget about them in like a standard pollinator mix?
Yeah, so some plants will stay open throughout the night, and allow nocturnal pollinators to come in. Some, you can see this, like this, the sun drops and they'll close up. So there is a variety. Again, it's something that we need to be, really considering, making sure that the changes that we do in, positive and not just benefiting daytime species, but nighttime species as well. There's a whole array of plants, depending on where you live, depending on what's right. But nighttime flowering plants, if you can get some of them, that's really going to benefit those nocturnal pollinators and bring them into your garden.
And this is me not really knowing much about bugs, I guess. Like I was blown away that I saw a little tiny like fly thing that I thought was an ant. It was a carpenter bee or a relative of a carpenter bee, which I think of as being big and goofy, but this guy is a little tiny. Is it just moths that are on the insect world, nighttime pollinators, or are there like nighttime bees? Are there?
In some parts of the world, I think in the tropics, there's some nocturnal bees. On the whole, bees tend to be diurnal species. But again, light pollution being a thing, it's kind of keeping bees awake into longer hours, which can really hinder their sleep, in a similar way to what can happen for people, which could potentially impact colony health. So you have a light shining on your beehive and you think, that's nice, I can see the bee and they're still active, but actually you may be, causing some detriment. A real problem for urban areas where urban beehives are becoming a popular thing, people thinking that they're doing the right thing, may not be the best place for these things to be. There's a whole array, like when we start looking at insects and the number of insects species on the planet, it outweighs every other group of animal by like so much. It's impossible to count them all. I get to represent all of them, and that's like the tiniest minuscule like kind of plankton right up to colossal squid, and then everything in between. So there's a huge array of them, and the key thing really is that we have a good abundance and a good mix. We don't just focus in on certain species. Honeybees largely sort of a livestock product in most places. We manage them, we bring in more, and actually it's all of these wild species that have got their little niches within our ecosystems that we really should be focusing on.
There's this article that came from Homes and Gardens that made the case for bats being a key indicator of a healthy yard's ecosystem. So the article asserted that healthy yards are adjacent to high quality water sources, makes sense, but also in turn from that high quality water source, the insect population grows, and they allow for bats to successfully feed and grow their own population. In addition, it needs to be safe and dark for nesting nearby. Bats can consume upward of 1,200 insects an hour. That's insane. I had no idea. I see bats fly around here all the time, but I would never think it's 1,200 an hour. I would think maybe it's, maybe 100. I don't know.
Bill, that's just swell. So in order to have more bats, I have to have more mosquitoes. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, well, I think, maybe part of the problem is that we have so many mosquitoes because we don't have enough bats.
Good, true.
Yeah, there's a balance. There's a real balance. And we work with bat colleagues in with bat conservationists. And, we recognize what we're representing here at Bug Life. We're representing food for bats. And actually, the whole thing is, you need more insects. You have more insects, you got more food for bats, but also you've got more insects to do the things that they need to do. The insects and invertebrates, they support the base of the ecological pyramid. Okay. So if we start losing them, everything starts to topple. So we need more of them. And as I say, everything else above it's gonna do better. But yeah, bats incredible, like ferocious predators, really. And you kind of see them going around doing their thing, thinking, what are they doing? They're just sort of like fluttering about. But now on the whole, they are lapping up insects.
For you at home, may not be aware, there are some bats that will be conditioned to lighting and they'll use light to their advantage. But in bats across the board are light avoidant. And the ones that really are light avoidant aren't going to go anywhere close to that light, thereby cutting down on, any predation by certain bat species. So before we jump away from insects, David, I want to get your take on this one. I know we spoke about fireflies before, a little bit before the show, because Kelly over here was unaware that, they didn't have fireflies over in the UK. And I see stuff out there. I see articles saying, I think this comes from some social media influencer or something in social media. It really stems from 2024, back when we had some news items that came up saying firefly counts declined. And we had an episode where we focused specifically on the Bethany Beach firefly back in November. What this story that is being told is that we are the last generation to enjoy fireflies. To me, that feels kind of alarmist, but maybe it isn't. How does something like that impact your mission when you're trying to do education and help people understand what insects across the board do?
Yeah, sure. So I think fireflies and glowworms are in the same family as fireflies. We have them here in the UK, and they are a brilliant species or a brilliant family of insects to get people infused about nocturnal invertebrates and nocturnal species, because they're mesmerizing, like things that can create their own light, like unbelievable. I don't actually think it's too alarmist. Like, if you speak to most people here in the UK and say, have you ever seen a glowworm? Most of them, even like people who are like well into their nature and environmental things, go, I've not seen a glowworm. You know, it's one of the things that it's a real problem. And again, going back to that bias towards daytime, nighttime, less people are out at night and, you know, less likely to see these things. And on the whole, across the board, like right around the world, fireflies are threatened. You know, they are not doing well. And it is agreed alongside habitat loss and pesticide use that light pollution is one of the drivers on the IUCN red list for fireflies that is driving firefly declines. So these things are intrinsically linked. Whether we'll be the last generation to enjoy fireflies, I don't know, but we're probably very much likely to be the last generation to do something to stop them being lost. You know, we can do something about this now. We've spoken about how people grow up with certain lighting, and then trying to change that lighting to something else is really hard. And we've got a whole generation now that are seeing LEDs as the only source of lighting that they've had. And we know that even a single LED can be a problem, mimicking the glow of a glowworm or a firefly. We may not be the last generation to enjoy them. They're still out there. They'll be out there for a little while yet, but they're on a downward trend, and we can certainly be the generation to stop them disappearing. And I think that really should be the way that we start to look at these things.
Yeah, Bill, let me jump in here just quickly. For a future guest for you is a brilliant researcher here in the Boston area named Avalon Owens, who is the queen of fireflies and how light pollution affects them. An important thing for everyone to know is that fireflies are most active in the hour or two right after dusk, right after sunset. That is the time that you are most likely to have your porch light on and your outdoor lights on. And so be alert, because what Avalon's research has shown is that even having like an amber or yellow colored porch light, a low color temperature porch light, is not enough. You would want to have a red porch light, which is going to look a little weird, or basically don't have it on at all if you can manage, because they're supremely sensitive to lighting their environment. And what she's finding generally is that the males are still out there flashing, trying to attract a mate. The females stay home if there's light pollution around.
One of the things I noticed, went up to Cherry Springs Star Party a couple months back and standing there watching, because it was around midnight, 1 a.m. They had synchronized firefly. It was pretty insane. I never saw it before. And when cars would come up with their headlights, the field would go dark. And then it would take a minute or two, and it would get back to going again.
It's one of the things as well that we're finding, and there are so many firefly species around the world, and they all react differently regards to light. But as I say, on the whole, it's not great. And some of these species, you know, even if they're exposed to the artificial light and then you turn that light off, they've kind of come out, they've emerged, and they write, oh, it's still daytime, we'll go back to bed. And that's it for the night, you know. And some of these, they have a very short window to breed and to find mates. So, you know, even the idea of going, okay, we're going to have kind of like dimming of lights after a certain time, or we're going to turn lights off after a certain time, isn't going to solve the problem for all of these species, and particularly it's a problem for some of these firefly species.
Okay, I want to close out ecology here, so we have a few more articles, if that's okay with you guys. Switching over to birds, which obviously eat the invertebrates. First, it appears that some songbirds actually prefer to have light when migrating. Traps set to lure European skylarks garnered the most activity on full moon nights. The experiment took place over the course of 3 years from 2018 to 2020, northwest of Munster, Germany. The authors are not entirely confident on what to make of this, surmising that it could mean that the skylark migrates more heavily on fuller moon nights, thereby possibly utilizing the light to its navigational advantage somehow, or actually orient itself based on the moon. Another thought came from how swifts obtain a higher altitude flight under fuller moons. So that is perhaps the birds just adjusted altitude based on the moon light. Then we have one where we know that birds extend their daytime activities in areas with artificial light. That means that their nighttime starts much later. Due to this, artificial light at night has been seen to weaken hatchling success, right? It's also been indicated to create cognitive degradation for certain birds. And now a study from Proceedings of the Royal Society B says that zebra finches were shown, when isolated and grouped together, to have increased nighttime activity when experiencing low levels of artificial light at night. The study looked at how birds' behavior, psychological, behavioral, and molecular rhythms all changed. It found that the birds partially acclimated over 10 days, but still retained gene expressions that indicated persistent circadian rhythm disruptions. And then lastly, we have the curious tale of zebra finches, which are impacted by artificial light at night, but Bengalese finches don't seem to have much of a problem at all. In a study in the Journal of Experimental Biology, Bengalese finches maintained a healthy gut microbiome and stable metabolism under dim levels of artificial light at night, while zebra finches appeared to have difficulty regulating their metabolism and hence their body temperature. Their micro gut biome also appeared to experience inflammation. That's a lot out there. Stepping back and seeing how something as simple as light affects the circadian rhythm of most creatures, all the way down to your invertebrates.
Absolutely. I think, this is kind of like one of the first places where I start when I'm talking about the impacts of light pollution, that everything had evolved based on these cycles that have existed since literally the dawn of time, of day and night. And they've evolved to these things. Really, very few species have adapted to the changes that we have created on this planet in the last few hundred years, okay? Kind of like if we start looking back to industrial revolution and what we've done since then, we've been able to adapt. Not entirely, we're seeing problems that these pollutants are causing people, but on the whole, we've adapted. Other species haven't yet done that. They're still working to these rhythms that they've evolved and have passed on through generations and generations. I think the interesting thing about birds and what that kind of wealth of information that you've just given us there shows is that there's not just one solution that's going to cover everything. Whatever we study, there's a different problem that different species are facing. We're not going to have a silver bullet to this. Fundamentally, the solution is we don't have artificial light. We let the world do its natural thing. But that's not viable. It's not a reasonable expectation to be having. So how can we mitigate for these things? But we've got to be careful that we're not causing problems for one species whilst trying to benefit another species. And this is where we need to really keep ramping up our evidence, keep ramping up our studies. But in the meantime, take a precautionary approach to this, reduce the levels of pollution, reduce that low-hanging fruit that we can easily say, hey, these lights aren't needed. They're not necessary. They're serving no function. Get rid of them, and then we can start tackling some of the bigger problems. But it's very rare that you can go out and find a species that isn't impacted in one way, shape, or another by the introduction of artificial light to its environment. And it's scary, really.
Sure. Well, let's wrap it up. I think we went through a lot today, and I appreciate everyone staying with me. I appreciate you, listener at home, staying with us today. David, since you're the last one to talk, why don't you tell people where they can learn more about the campaign?
Sure. So head over to our website, buglife.org.uk. On there, you'll find our campaigns under light pollution. You'll find some guidance around nurture the night shift and how to benefit all of those nocturnal invertebrates. Simple actions. Curtains for light pollution. Shut your curtains when you turn on the light inside and keep the light inside rather than letting it outside, and you'll let the bugs carry on and do their own thing. And you'll find our new campaign over there as well on Don't Neglect the Night, helping us to champion policies and legislation to benefit the nocturnal environment.
And to sign up for that. So it's not just me and Kelly being the only Americans, all right?
Exactly, yeah.
So I'll throw this over to you, Karim. If you have any final thoughts, I know you doing your Dark Source thing and got a lot moving. You're doing a talk, or you're doing a presentation, I gather. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's lots happening. Yet going to Germany for a talk. I'll be also attending an event in Portugal, University of Aveiro. They're doing a responsible light event, a conference, which will be quite exciting. They've been also apparently developing a dark sky friendly luminaire. So I'm quite excited when people who are not necessarily coming from the realm of lighting develop something like a lighting gadget or like a technology, because the parameters they're operating towards will be very different than our approach. Yeah, and also the UK, there will be an event organized by Dark Sky UK in Newcastle, University of Newcastle. That's September 9th, I suppose. I hope to see you there, David. Yeah, so a lot's happening. It was half that I can remember.
That's good to hear. It's good being busy. It's good busy, right?
I suppose so, yeah. Like, when you can't really, lift your head up, I suppose, keeps you busy.
Yeah, right. But last but not least, it's been an honor, Mr. Kelly Beattie. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any final thoughts? I know if folks want to find you, they will go swing out to Sky and Telescope and look for the Sky Tour podcast. I think I have that right.
We now actually do an illustrated YouTube version.
Yeah, you do. I saw that. That's really good. That's
a labor of love. In fact, I'm going to start working on the next one right after we're done here. Hey, and I have to say, for those listeners who might be eager to get going to help but don't know where to go, darksky.org has 70 chapters worldwide, but it has 2,000 what we call advocates. These are standalone people who are helping out in whatever way they can, and there's a whole framework of information and tutorials and stuff through Dark Sky. So if you're out there listening and you want to get involved, go to darksky.org, follow the links to advocates, and sign up. They have Zoom sessions or Slack sessions at least once a month, and you can become informed and get ready to go out there and fight the good fight, as you're doing, Bill.
And you can probably find folks in your area.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
At the very least, if nothing good comes of it, you'll have a good drinking club. Well, I want to thank you guys again. Thank you so much. It's been great to have you back on. Thank you at home for joining us today, and I really appreciate you guys staying with us. As a reminder, feel free to drop a comment via any of the links in our show notes. You can always reach me, Bill, at lightpollutionnews.com. Light Pollution News is a listener-supported show, which means take no outside advertising and solely rely on you, listener, to help cover our expenses. If you like what we do, why not consider helping us by becoming a supporter? Today's show was recorded on July 27th, 2025. I'm your host, Bill McGinney. Thanking you once more for joining today. And remember to only shine the light where it's needed.